Hi, Ernie.
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
hold on. I just realized why I can't hear you very well.
It's always something.
I just have to remember to put the computer speakers on instead of headphones.
Yeah.
Thank you for checking up
I just
on it.
wasn't sure whether you'd gotten it squared away with Pam or not.
I think
Yeah.
what apparently was going on is I was always getting the messages through the list serve, and I got the messages. I always got the notices, so I didn't worry
Yeah.
about it. And then for that meeting, I didn't get for the special meeting, I didn't get a notice through the list serve. And
Yeah.
it was sent to the listers, which I don't get that on my home email.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I tend to right now, as Cheryl knows, I'm not really thrilled with being a lister. I'm doing it strictly to keep the office open
Huh.
because and so far we don't have any people, don't have enough volunteers in the town to
Mm.
we only have
Yeah.
3,700 people, but none of them are volunteering for listers.
Huh.
They only want to run for a
Ernie?
select board or maybe commission.
Yeah. So you have a combination of what looks like a Hawaiian accent and a
Yep.
background. I'm not sure what the background is, though.
You don't know that
That looks like
background?
Green
You
Mountain.
don't know that
Looks
background?
like
Come on. Come
it
on. You know
looks
that
like
background.
I do know that background. Actually, I had to move my camera, the iPhone that is my camera.
I
Uh,
know. Yeah, I do. Well, I'm in Honolulu. Um, so yeah, and so I've just got to a new place. So I have my beautiful, it's actually very smelly. It's giving me, you
ah,
can't take it off because it be um not
some
welcome
bad.
when it gives a
I
bad
see.
look to
Yeah,
take it
yeah,
off.
yeah. I
But
see.
it's
Yeah.
very strong, very strong.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, this is a good place to have an assignment.
What are you doing there?
I do executive search, and one of the areas I work in is in private schools, and so I'm doing the search for the head of school at the Iolani School in Honolulu. I did a few years ago. I was out here doing the search for the head of the Punahou School, which is perhaps better known, although Iolani is kind of is their top
What a
competitor.
horrible job. To have to go and spend time in Hawaii. That is so awful.
I know, isn't it terrible? Well, on this trip too, is that they wanted to see us right on the Tuesday after um, the holiday weekend, and I had to work in Seattle on Wednesday and Thursday. So I flew over on Friday morning, and I convinced my sister and my brother to come out, and we went to Kauai for the weekend, and now they are actually having a ball. I'm working, and they are at the beach.
There you go.
And it's
That's
been
the
Right.
problem with
cold
work
and raw
trips.
here, by the way, in case you missed it.
Yeah,
What is
it frosted this morning here.
I'm not going to tell you about the weather here then.
Yeah. It's supposed to be nice. In 3 or 4 days, it gets back to nice
Yeah,
weather. So it
very
isn't
good.
like November has come early and then we're
Ugh.
but we'll make it. All right. Um,
All right.
I think
So,
it
yeah.
looks like Annette's here. I believe that's who Jade is.
Yeah, that is
Um,
right.
and I don't know. I don't see anybody else in the waiting room. Oh, wait, I'm wrong. Henry Albert,
Okay.
but we're at 6:30.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to wrap probably in an hour and 20 minutes to get to my next appointment here. So that will just be just a heads up. So
Mhm.
we'll plan to do that.
Mhm.
Just getting this size packet. Um,
Yeah, for people's information, we had a little trouble with a revised packet for today. Did you see that?
yes.
So we had two new things to Pam yesterday for a 24-hour notice on the revised packet, but yesterday the town office was closed and Pam wasn't there. So there
Yeah,
are a couple things that we can refer to sort of new as, oh, here's an idea, let's talk about it.
right.
Nobody will have looked at it in a document form, so we'll just need to
We'll just have to delay it for
introduce
the next
it.
time. Yeah,
Yeah, or park some of the specifics, yeah.
yeah.
But
So,
I think some of it can just be kind of brought up de novo and discussed.
right, and that's probably a good way to think about it anyways. Okay. Um, so we have a lot of different things on the agenda. And so I guess probably move to
So,
approve the agenda. Is that
yeah, that's it.
yeah,
Yeah, so I would move to approve the agenda as written.
Second,
And then
okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Um, so public comments for items not on the agenda.
I see no hands.
Okay.
It's us, Annette, and Mary Albert.
Great.
And we got
Just
all the good stuff's on the agenda anyway.
Yeah, I just posted the correspondence from Marcia Calloway. There should have also been the correspondence, and I'm sorry I didn't miss this, from Jan, you had suggested I write to someone about the 5/100 change.
Right,
The
which
change,
is
and so
Margolis. Yeah, that's in here.
Margolis. Oh, it is. Okay, so that's an
Yes,
updated
that's in
one.
here.
So I just
It's
wanted to, and
Page
Marcia,
5 of the
yeah.
packet, 5 and 6.
Yeah, so Marcia's comment was really in response to the fact that at the last meeting, we said if there are plans that you think are well done, send them on, etc. She was not at the meeting, but she read or saw the minutes, and so she passed that on as one that she felt was a good
Mhm.
option. So I wanted to have that share that with folks, and I put it on the web. I mean, everything, of course, I would put on the website, but wanted to do that. So that was the only input that we received from folks about when we asked
Other
if there
towns.
were other towns that felt they had done a good job on the town plan. So anyways, wanted to do that. And then you can see the conversation from Ann Margolis just about the Rule 5. I don't know how you say it. It's 5.100 or 5.100 about the 5.100, which I don't know that there was anything particularly new about this, but it was just
Well, I
helpful.
found it, I
Yeah.
thought it was useful because that was the one kind of overriding question we had was, does the new 5/100 change what
Right.
we're trying to do or the tools we have to do it?
Mhm.
And the way that I read that and the way that we talked about it before was that the planning commission and the select board would look at applications later, meaning in
Correct.
the
Right.
45-day period. So we can assume we would have more complete applications than the sort of back of the napkin sketches we might have gotten
Right.
beforehand. So that was one.
Right.
And then the other was the basically the 3-acre forest limit that was
Right.
built in now, so that whatever we did with priority forest blocks and so forth was already piggybacking on the significant forest clearing isn't allowed.
Right. Oh no,
change to
those were
part-
two really important changes that we're not going to be approving super, these kind of conceptual back of the envelope, back of the napkin plans, and then have people say, oh, well, it's changed a whole lot. And if you want to go through and then revisiting it becomes challenging. So I agree.
Yeah. And then the other takeaway I thought was that we still should do what we're doing, that it was still useful to have the town as an enhanced energy plan and specifics, more regulatory sounding specifics in the town plan, because it would help us have more influence, right? That
Mhm.
that need or that goal that we had was not erased by
Right,
the new 5100.
right. One thing that just wondered about with the forest clearing, um, if someone owns land. Oh, and sorry, Annette, why don't you go first?
Well, go ahead. I have a question, but you go ahead.
Yeah, so if someone has a land and they, think, oh, I think I'd like to do this, and it's forested. I mean, if you own land, you can cut that land, correct? And then
Yes.
What do you
then
mean?
you're
You can
not
cut it.
clearing it for,
It goes, the
mean, you-
ruling or the 5100 has some pretty significant detail about what that forest clearing is, like
yeah.
percentage basal area at certain time. And I think it says something historic, so that you have to have cleared it some period of time before. I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
it made it so that you couldn't just clear it, wait 6 months, and then say, hey, look
Yeah,
at that, no clearing.
right,
That's,
right.
am I right on
Okay.
that, Annette?
Yeah, there was one case in Middlesex where a parcel was cleared and then a solar project was proposed, and the allegation was that it was done for the solar project, but the landowner claimed that it was done for a house that then they decided not to build. So there are ways to play games about it, but in general, it's not a good thing to play games about because the PUC is pretty, and so's A&R, pretty strict about site preparation in advance of solar.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Okay.
And in particular, you don't go cut down your forest and then apply for a solar project.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
I wondered was, are you going to be talking about the Waitsfield Town Plan?
Uh, Happy to. Let's talk about it.
Well, I looked at it and I think it
Mhm.
is a good example. Some of the things to direct your attention to when you do look at it is that they have listed their scenic roads. And then
Yes.
put standards in place that say that, views of projects on our scenic roads are prohibited unless, and then they say there's some screening and things. So, um, Waitsfield has for quite a while had a restriction against development above 1,700 feet in elevation.
Right.
But they're a very different type of town from Norwich in many respects because they have they have these big ridge lines and they're in the Mad River Valley as opposed to all of your funny little, well, I won't say funny, beautiful little
That's
narrow
the
valleys.
that's
And
the hand topography of Norwich.
yeah,
Your left hand, I think it is. Yeah.
so I don't know if anybody's tackled doing the scenic roads, but they have the specific policies. They have the standard maps of the sites that are essentially uh, solar resource maps that then have the constraints that basically all comes from the state. But then they've done their work on the local level to try and identify the specific roads that they want to place restrictions on. They also have some language about steep slopes, and so I think it's definitely a good plan to review
Mhm.
and see how you might
Yep.
adopt some of the things that they've got.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that was partly to put it in there as yet another plan. On the steep slopes, there's a lot of consistency on the plans that I've reviewed or the plans that people have suggested we review. This one included on what a steep slope really should be, or what not that it should be, what a steep slope is traditionally in the state and how they define it in this regard. On the scenic roads and or others, what has been I mean, I continue to worry. I think it's something we need to do, but I continue to worry is how do you make these determinations and keep them away from being really privileging the already privileged. So you live on a, wealthy road with a big view. Is that just a scenic road and we give the people who lived in those wealthy areas better protections than other folks?
It's a
Well,
tough.
is it a public good, so to speak? If is the Van Armen farm, a public
Yeah.
good and worth protecting?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there is kind of a difference. It's that public vantage point thing,
Mm-hmm.
so that if you think about Van Armen's farm and compare it, even to some pretty view that's out at the end of one of our roads, that basically 10 people drive by every day, and one that 500 people drive by every day. That seems to be a reasonable, a criteria that matters in terms of public vantage point and how valuable the thing is, the view.
Mhm.
I mean, does Norwich have any mobile home parks? I mean, do you have a sense of where your sort of lower income people live? And are they by
Upper
nature?
Loveland Road and that.
Yeah, well, okay. Is it by nature?
Beaver Meadow and Kendall Station Road too.
Yeah, that's
Are
true.
they by their nature not scenic areas?
No, actually, both Western Norwich,
Yeah,
which was until very recently, literally it was considered in an almost formal way the low income part of town is actually quite scenic.
right.
The little
Okay.
chapel, little Beaver
and
Meadow
it's-
Chapel, and
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's also the part of town that has the most dense forest block. Has the most forest block.
right. Priority forest blocks. Yeah,
Well, then I don't think that you could be accused of being discriminatory if you
Yeah.
put standards in place that are affecting people, both rich and poor. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention to you. I think that maybe it was brought up at one of the last meetings I attended, but the Department of Public Service has put together a committee to work on a report to the legislature for especially manufactured homes, low income housing, and impacted communities to address the replacement of the
I
group
think
net,
she's
group net,
frozen.
no,
group-
she's fine.
I think everyone's
Go
frozen.
ahead, you're
I
fine.
think you froze her.
nobody's frozen in my world.
No, Ernie's frozen in my world.
Yeah, Ernie is a little frozen.
Yeah.
There, Ernie?
He's very thoughtful.
Yes, he's. Hey, Ernie, you there? To address the replacement of the group net metering provision. And so
So say that again,
the
what,
group net
because it sounded
metering
like you
as of-
started with a housing thing and then switched to a,
well,
solar
as of
thing.
the end of this year, no more group net metering is going to be allowed,
right, right.
except there is a carve out for a year for low income housing
Okay, yep.
and
Affordable housing.
impacted communities and manufactured homes. So there are about
So that's an
24,
extension to the group net metering closeout.
right, just for them. Hi, Ernie, you're back.
Okay, it was me who was gone.
Yes,
Yeah.
you were frozen.
Oh, so you guys were all frozen. You're frozen again, Mary.
No, I'm
No.
not.
No,
No,
you're
I'm
not.
not.
Now you're
No,
not.
no.
Three
were.
out of four, we win.
So Ernie, I was saying that the law, the Renewable Energy Standard Law, contained something that is relevant to you're all looking at how to craft standards and things, because it has changed in a very substantial way. So up until the end, through the end of this year, you can still have these 500 kilowatt virtual net metering projects, but after the end of this year, those will no longer be allowed, and any net metering that's done will have to be, the majority of it will have to be at the site where the power is being used, with the exception of low income housing, affordable housing, whatever I guess it's low income, and impacted communities and manufactured homes. So the legislation was very specific, and it called for a group to come together to look at it. And so Linda Gray was on the group. There were about 24 of us. There were a couple legislators, and we met 3 times. And so between Linda and me, we kind of got a deep dive into the law and what it does and doesn't do. So I think we were all kind of surprised that this really was the end of group net metering, and that
Yeah, so can you help me out a little bit? So take Upper Loveland as an example, or take something like that that says a company gets a business plan that makes sense to plop, 150 or to 500, a 500 or below
Mhm.
project that plugs into the grid
Gotta
and you
plug
sell
in,
the
now it's,
power.
now it's gonna have to plug into the users.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you had a company, let's just for the sake of Norwich, say King
King
Arthur
Arthur.
Power.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and King Arthur used 500 kilowatts. Then they could do it because it would be serving them. Now, I think there's a carve out in there that's 50% or more of load. But uh, there was someone from Vermont
Hmm.
Law School who was also part of it, Genevieve. We were both, I think, we're still not clear about that, but I think that that's what it is. But it's the majority in any case, like 51% at least has to be
And it
used,
has to be co-located.
has to be located there, right? So we, in our discussions, we're saying, well, could we expand this a little bit? I mean, we were all surprised that we were supposed to be talking about a very narrow thing when we thought we were going to be talking about how to replace group net metering with something new. So
Right.
as of January, I guess the types of projects that you all need to plan for are essentially things that are serving local load when they're net metering. Now, there's the utilities were part of this group. There's there has developed what I've only realized fairly recently, kind of a, a division in terms of how one thinks about building solar in Vermont. So we have the transmission system, we have the transmission grid. I attended a Velco transmission planning workshop in Rutland, and they said they would like to see any new solar put in places where the transmission system can support it. And
Yeah.
then Green Mountain Power kind of said something similar at the last meeting we had just last week with this was the third and final meeting of this group. So then I think about, well, there are a lot of areas that don't have the grid capacity in the distribution system, but we're all supposed to be electrifying everything. And so what happens to those areas that on Green Mountain Power's uh, distribution system maps show up in red, where they don't have either the transformers or the substations or whatever. So
Mhm.
there is a bit of a disconnect between what some of us think of as the locally distributed generation that's going to serve local load, as opposed to the larger projects that will go into areas that can get up on the grid where there is room in the transmission
Yeah.
system. So
So help me out then.
yeah,
What did two things? What did they replace and I may have confused people by, yes, that's better. What did they replace? You said, and that's kind of, they're trying to encourage renewable energy. So they theoretically took away the piece of the group net metering and then they replaced it with some way because they increased the percentage of, the target goal. So they
right. So
clearly
this
had
is
to
really all
think
about
that they were
cost.
pushing and pulling. But
Right.
so
So this
that's
is,
Yeah.
one question. But the other one is from a Norwich point of view, to your point, we can list on one hand who uses more than X kilowatts of
right.
load. And so,
Right.
and it's got to be co-located. So boom, you're done with
Okay, but
those
that's
codes
just net
existing.
metering. And the net metering
Right.
part of
That's
it
my
really
question.
is all about cost. It's the most expensive power. And so you build it next to load. Those are really the only ones that ought to be getting those high net metering rates. So then we got presentations from different models, like for instance, Vermont Electric Co-op built a 5 megawatt project, and their customers can buy shares of that, and they can get the benefit of the solar without having to site it on their property. So that we looked at several different models for, uh, you know, how to address customers getting solar that's not and it's not necessarily sited next to load. So I think that the other thing from your perspective in terms of thinking about how you're putting together a plan on siting is there was discussion about size, and the utilities don't like the 20 megawatt ones. GMP weighed in and said 5 or smaller. Others weighed in 5 or smaller. So are there any possible sites in Norwich where somebody might want to put, let's say, 1, 2, or 5 megawatt solar projects? I mean,
So these would be commercial.
right,
They would not be net metered, clearly, and you're
right.
putting on group net metered, so they're commercial,
Mm-hmm,
commercial scale.
mm-hmm.
And so what is the regulatory process? We've now gotten ourselves all trained up on group net metering, siting, and 5100 and so forth, but 5100 is the net metering rule. So
Right.
what would, if a 2 megawatt site wanted to plop themselves in Leonard Cook's old backyard,
Mm-hmm.
what is the process that's used?
Well, this is this is obviously kind of in play right now, because there's no question that there is going to be a need for more solar because of the renewable energy standard update. It's going to
Yep.
require
Yeah.
more land. So from your perspective, from the town planning perspective, in order for your plan to take advantage of this substantial deference, you need to put standards in place for specific areas in town where somebody might want to come and do that. Now, we know that near the three-phase power line is the most likely location. We don't know whether a utility would issue an RFP. There is a new Solar for All program. There's something called an ACRE program out of the Department of Public Service that there was one model we looked at that was much better than the rest because it talked about community engagement and involving the community in it. So there are these different programs. The state has gotten many millions of dollars to do this, and so some of the different things are very much in play because they're new. But I would say that as you look at your town and your scenic roads, the areas that you want to protect, the areas that, if you don't want that in forest blocks, then you can be specific about districts. You can be specific about highest priority forest blocks. There is some value in lower priority forest blocks, but think about first what's near those three-phase power lines. And I think, Jan, you've already kind of done an evaluation of your built environment and what you have room for.
Yeah.
But that's kind of
So is it valid to say that to get an accepted enhanced energy plan, we have to have a credible plan for how we would site and a certain amount, a generation that is equal to our
Well,
sharing
you can
goal?
put in standards, and that Waitsfield plan is a good step in terms of doing it. The question is, how much do you want to put in it? I think. I really find your town to be fairly challenging because you don't have three-phase power in much of the town. You're already building or people are already doing a lot of net metering at their homes. And so what's left?
Right.
Yeah.
What's near the three-phase power lines, and are there specific areas that you might want to put some more specific standards? For instance, in that Waitsfield plan, they talk about that anything that is would be visible from those scenic roads is strictly prohibited unless they are totally screened. So you're trying to find ways to say yes to solar in probably
This is now commercial solar.
commercial solar.
5100 is really not the law we care about.
It's
I mean, if we went with the Norwich doesn't have very many loads that are big enough to
to cite, yeah.
Cite it.
near
Yeah.
load, and we don't have a big enough low income housing thing to give them an extra year.
Yeah.
That means nobody's got time to do a 500 kW or, site in Norwich. So what we're going to be talking about is not 5100. It's going to be commercial sites that then go under PSB CPG review. I mean, is
It
that?
would go, yeah, they would all go, it would be the regular section 248 review.
Yeah.
And it would, uh, Green Mountain Power is doing some of these projects where they've been proposed by a developer and then they've entered into a contract to buy the power. There's some talk like of what Vermont Electric Co-op is doing of them issuing an RFP, and then the developer responds to that and builds the project. Then the utilities don't own the project, that somebody else does. So there's a lot of different approaches to the ownership side of it and the how it gets going. But I think you really just need to keep your focus on the solar siting
Hmm.
aspect of it and not
From
worry
from the cost, does the cost point of view set a lower limit? I mean, we talked, the 500 kW was set by 5100. Um, if it goes to these commercial ones and it's the utility and is there too small to bother?
Well, the best model that we've seen that has successfully reduced cost is the standard offer program, which back in 2014, the bids coming in were 14 cents, 13 cents, and the program's now ended, but when it ended last year, the bids were coming in at about 8 cents. So it had the problem that it didn't have any siting standards at all, and communities were blindsided by it, but it did successfully drive down the cost. And I think that the prices that, for instance, Green Mountain Power may be entering into for these 2 to 5 megawatt projects may be somewhere around there, the 8 cents. Um, so when
Mhm.
there's a competitive process of some sort, then that can result in lower costs. But
Hmm.
it- the does Norwich have let's just take an acreage number. Are there places close to the three-phase power line where a company might want to come and suggest a let's see, 85 acres would be for 20 megawatts, so divide that by 4, so let's say 20 acres.
Mhm.
And then what visual effects would there be that might uh, you might want to address in your siting standards and that are specific to the site? That's the challenge.
Yeah,
But
we have so
I mean,
little.
if we look at three phase, we're little, then we look at topography
Hmm.
and access and that's where, and then
Slopes and yeah.
it's gonna
Slopes.
be, to your point, Norwich being tricky, if you're a developer and you're a Green Mountain Power and you're looking essentially regionally or on your beat, Norwich is not going to be the easiest place to put this.
Right.
So it could limit if we said there's a cost issue that keeps it above a certain size, and there's a cost issue around transmission lines. We could do a fairly to the topic on the number 6 on the agenda about preferred sites for that says less than 500 kW. But if we did for preferred site analysis for realistically commercially viable
Hmm.
projects, which might be 1, 2, 3 megawatts, we could do a pretty comprehensive look at the options in Norwich in pretty short order.
Yeah,
Yep.
up to 5, I would say. And then you have on the agenda the Rutland Renewable Energy case, which
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
is
yeah.
fascinating in terms of this discussion because it really does focus you in on how the PUC evaluates these projects and that the Supreme Court had not only a decision, but then another decision and then a
A
dissent.
descent. A
It
descent.
really
Yeah.
sliced and diced it nicely, but that was at
Yeah.
the time that the law had not been finished, that then gives the town substantial deference to your plan. And so those were all about due consideration. And
Right.
they're basically saying the PUC can do anything they want with due consideration. So it
It,
really does bolster putting an enhanced energy plan in place that gets substantial deference with specific policies and land conservation measures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
it,
saw that it essentially said,
whatever.
yeah, we heard you, but tough, the PUC
Exactly.
can do what they want.
Right. All the more reason for us to be very specific in the plan that we present. And I think
But
that's,
to
yeah,
your point, it also means that getting to substantial deference, getting to an EEP matters.
Yeah.
Hmm.
okay. Okay.
So sorry to take you on that tangent, but it's, the
No,
the,
that's good
the
stuff.
story's changing as we go along.
hmm It's interesting though, because there was one thing you said, Annette, that I just do wonder whether, part of what this town plan too should be doing is to really trying to figure out how do you encourage people to do their own net metering on their own roofs. They kind of do their own solar investment there, as opposed to, if this idea that you need to be near the transmission lines and in a space where there's not steep slopes, where there's not a ridge line, where there's not, on and on and on, which, kind of comes to modestly comes close to the null set in town. you know how do you how do we try to identify where in fact we can have an impact, rather than because it feels like that they're not that otherwise there's not going to be very much to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think we should do, if you start with the statement that it's not a competition per se, but a utility or a regional view of things is looking to site 30, 40 megawatts of capacity within 20 miles of Norwich, and that sets a limit on cost, they're going to go somewhere else. If they're not going to just come to Norwich because Norwich needs to do its part,
Right.
it's going to set a lower limit on the cost. And so we can look at Norwich from that lower limit
hmm
pretty quickly. And we should
Yeah.
say, look, we shouldn't jump up and down and say, come to us. Short of subsidizing it, they're not going to come if it's not on the transmission line and a
Yeah.
place that is big enough to be viable. So that to me seems like a much more useful and limited mapping exercise. Like when we were saying, oh, we're going to do it distributed, we're going to have these 150 to 500 things dotted around
Right.
town. Where can we fit an acre or two?
Right.
And we don't even care about three-phase power. That was a much more daunting mapping exercise.
So then
Now,
to the other side of the equation, you do want to have some standards in there for, home and, historic districts, for just traditional net metering. You don't want glare to reflect on neighbors' properties, things like that,
mhm.
those are worthwhile, but net metering registrations just get registrations, and the adjoiners aren't even notified. And it
hmm
just coming like mad. I see them because I look at new cases every day, and so I see uh, continuing filings of registrations. But if you don't know, I mean, you have 15 days to comment. So the standards don't really matter for those. On the other hand, I still think it's good to identify something for your.
So if we just think through kind of three categories, and they did it in the law, but we have the 15 kilowatt and below, like what I've got on my roof and what lots of people have on their roof, and that's fallen off a log. You pretty much, yep, you can do it.
Yeah.
Then we had the one on Bragg Hill, Hennessy, and other, where it's small enough. His was 50, it matches the loads in Norwich. And so you may have a few 50s, somebody may have 100 that's load justified. And then you're going to have these commercially viable under kind of regional competition
Mhm.
guidelines. Is that a viable, is that like an honest breakdown of the things we're going to be dealing
I
with?
think so, yeah. I mean, there is this low income and impacted community carve out um,
For
that
another year.
for
For
another year,
another year. And that's
which
probably
this
not going to imply, I don't know that there's anywhere in Norwich that would fall in that.
and
And you
this
would have had to
legislation.
have started now to get it in that
Yeah.
time.
I guess the other challenge for planners is that this legislation that we have been invited to look at, that is of very limited report to the legislative committees. It'll be as typical legislation, probably like what they call a Christmas tree, that will be the start of something that may build to replace the standard offer program or build to replace the group net metering program. Who knows what the legislature will do with that bill? They could add on and turn it into something totally different, but that's so far what we know is, and that's what I've came away thinking was you need to think about where these larger projects would go, and that group net metering is over and it's only net metering to serve load.
Does this make the regional commission's involvement in these siting things more important? I mean, theoretically, the regional commission should say, gosh, Norwich, you got crummy topology and infrastructure. We got better places to put it and help with that.
Probably, when Two Rivers first, it was one of the three pilot regional commissions, and when they first started doing their regional plan, they divided up the quotas of wind and solar in every town. So every town had a quota of one or two industrial wind turbines, and I looked at the plan and I thought, good luck with this. And then they backed off of it and they threw that plan away. But it was an interesting exercise. Um,
Mhm.
and but I was watching the solar siting uh, commission way back in before this law got put in place, and they did the same thing. They looked at it and they said, some towns just don't have solar capacity, and they can't. Some towns have practically none, and they rejected the quota system. But it still is this impression that's being given by regional planning commissions to towns that you have these quotas to meet. So I don't get it, but I wouldn't worry about the quota. I would say, your plan, and Jan, your chair of the planning commission, is a little bit different in its purpose from what this group's purpose is as a siting. And so for the siting, you just need to keep your eye on that narrow piece of how to put language in your plan that directs the developers and perhaps the utilities, if they're contracting out for it, to appropriate sites, and that will not result in opposition. That's one of the best things you could do, is identify specific policies that would get projects built rather than opposed.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Okay. But it's so interesting though, Annette, because if we do that, and that's what we've been working on, and I don't know if you were here, but we kind of got the updated document to Pam yesterday, but it was not within the 24-hour period because it was a holiday. And so that's why that's not posted. But we've gone through a couple of iterations in this group, kind of looking at what should be the definitions
Mhm.
of these plants. But if we can do that, and then if
Yeah.
we also, and then the other question is, do we want to do this? Let's drive around and figure out what are scenic roads and just put that out there for people to respond to.
Mhm.
Is that the work we really need to do in this committee? Um, uh,
I think
and
the scenic
potentially,
road ones.
think about the commercially viable locations. Is
Mm,
there, is it Leonard Cook's property? Is there any, are there other places that would fall into that? I mean, that's the one that always
Is
comes up
that-
and
I mean,
around.
I'd like to bring up while we have Annette and we don't have the documents to look at, but we can paraphrase pretty easily because my question is based on what you did, Mary, when you cleaned it up and sort of tightened it
Yeah.
up, was to be much more definitive. And so it says may not be, you know, PV site, these types of projects may not be located on, and then list with definitions, slopes, historic, ridgeline, high priority forest, and actually greater than 500 kW. So my question is, when we say something as definitive as may not, shall not, whatever sort of the strongest.
Must not.
Must,
Yeah, must.
must
And
and shall,
so-
those are the magic words.
And so that's what I'm trying to balance out. Because if we say like the town plan policy that is in the edits is development shall not happen on greater than 15% slopes. Now, if you go to the zoning regs definition of development, it's extremely broad. It's basically you touch a structure, you
Okay.
change its use. You know, it's erection, construction, reconstruction, conversion, relocation, enlargement of, or any change to the use of any building or structure. So if you, and then we said we wanted to be try to be consistent with our definitions from zoning to subdivision to plan. Saying 15% slopes, no development is going to blow up in our face. You know, it may just be too
So, yeah,
long.
No, I
Yeah.
think the slopes language is okay. Um, I want to read to you from the Waitsfield Town Plan, just on their designated scenic areas. New facilities, including generation facilities greater than 20 kilowatts, substations and transmission lines are specifically prohibited within or as viewed from these areas unless significant associated impacts can be avoided. For example, through facility siting, screening, or line burial. And then they have 4 bullet points: designated historic districts, including the Waitsfield Village Historic District, Waitsfield Common Historic District, Mad River Valley Rural Historic District, which are also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Town-owned conservation land, including Scragg Mountain Town Forest, Woolidge's Town Forest, Austin Parcel, and Tardy Parcel. Significant views within the Mad River Scenic Byway corridors, routes 117, a National Scenic Byway, as identified in the Mad River Byway Corridor Management Plan, and views from locally designated scenic roads as listed under Chapter 8 of the plan, or as subsequently designated by the Waitsfield Select Board. That's a very good way
Yeah, that is good.
and then the list of the scenic roads is separate.
Right. It's an appendix that you can update.
It's yeah, it's in their scenic road section, I think. But I'm going to look for their slope language because I'm pretty sure they have some of that too.
they do. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm thinking partly realistically what would pass the planning commission and then the select board and the town in terms of how restrictive people want to be. And then,
so yeah, so in
but
the
as soon as you put wiggle room in that says, you know, unless mitigated by, then how strong is what you got?
Well, so the Waitsfield Town Plan has another section of bullet points that is part of it's the page immediately following their possible constraints map. In accordance with Act 174 and the PSD's energy planning standards, the town of Waitsfield designates the following areas as wholly unsuitable for the siting of renewable energy sources. And then they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points, including lands above 1,700 feet, class 1 and 2 wetlands, habitats for species listed as rare, threatened, or endangered, special flood hazard areas, very steep slopes with natural pre-development grades in excess of 25%, and tier 2 forest blocks consistent with the policies in chapter 11. So again, those are reasonable standards.
Yeah, no, that sounds very helpful. I just wonder, in, well, what it emphasizes, I think, is the need to update our scenic map.
Yeah.
It's 2020. It's 24 years old. It's 2000, sorry.
Mhm.
It's 20 plus years old. And that's something that is a worthwhile exercise.
Those are the kind of standards. Now, to get to that Rutland Renewable Energy case, and Ernie, did you read those court documents?
I did. I don't remember them very well right now.
Well, the part of the
I
discussion
went through it.
that prompted me to send them had to do with what's zoning and what's not zoning. And so
Yeah, I
I
saw
didn't
that.
read them till today, so I remember them. And it it was a very odd situation where the town rushed and developed a
Yeah,
not exactly an update to the town plan, but a supplement, and they got it adopted by the select board in time before the case got going, but it never was added to the town plan. But okay, that was accepted. But
yeah,
the part that was sort of viewed as zoning had to do with the setbacks. And they were
yeah,
trying to get this setback of 500 feet uh, from the uh, property line or something. And that was that they said that's like zoning. I mean, I don't know.
right.
The legislature, I believe, by that time had put setbacks from roads and property lines into a statute, but they had not yet done the enhanced energy plan part. So
Yeah, it
you
sounded
were
like the argument was you typically see setback restrictions in zoning bylaws or zoning regs. Therefore, this doesn't pass the sniff test for not being zoning. Zoning is exempt, and this is a plan, so setback doesn't count. So is there anything to be generalized from that? I mean, setbacks is pretty specific.
well, there already are setbacks, and actually that Supreme Court decision had in the Beth Robinson part of it, which was not sort of a dissent, but uh, an addition that uh, the setbacks are now established by statute, but towns can, with the agreement of the applicant, can get less of a setback. However, that part of the law was later found to not be valid. So I think the setbacks are what they are in state law, and you know, I, I'm not, but the part of what we were talking about in terms of the Norwich Town Plan had to do with your ridgeline language.
Mhm.
And so
Hmm.
what do you want to do? Because you have very extensive ridgeline language in your zoning bylaw. And how much of that do you want to incorporate into, or do you want to do something like Waitsfield has done and just said everything above a certain elevation is off limits? Now, you're just talking about solar. Wind comes into play much more with ridgelines, but
Hmm.
that's I think the piece for you to look at now. Look at your zoning bylaw as it relates to your ridgelines and see if there is language in there that you want to bring into uh, the. But I don't think you want
So
to take.
is there anything from Rutland or similar cases since Rutland that that limits what we can do? Basically, okay, ridge lines, not setbacks, ridge line stuff, pulling that from zoning and putting it into the plan. Is there any guidance around that has
Well,
come from
the other
legislature?
case that has been to the Supreme Court at least 4 times is these two Bennington cases, Apple Hill Solar and
Mhm.
Chelsea Solar. And there's the town plan that those decisions from the Supreme Court have been based on are a town plan that they've given due consideration to, but it's not an enhanced energy plan. The PUC has denied Chelsea Solar twice, and Apple Hill Solar was approved once and denied once. It's very complicated, but the most recent decision on Apple Hill Solar that does provide guidance is about their rural conservation district and how it has standards in it and their town plan that prohibits development in that district on prominently visible hillsides. And it was found that it was a prominently visible hillside. The PUC denied it based on it not complying with the town plan and violating the aesthetics, and the Supreme Court upheld it. So that was sufficient because it was in the district that identified the location. So those are the pieces you got to put together.
Right.
Location. So if you know, in a way, your challenge isn't that hard if you start looking at your three-phase power
Right.
and just drive down the road and see what you got, what's in the neighborhood. Are there areas that if you saw a 10-acre solar array that people would be upset about? So those are I think that's the place to start is in.
Well, why don't, I mean, this is fraught, but it's fun because it's mapping, so I can do it. But, I mean, I am perfectly happy to take the three-phase lines in Norwich and make a 10-acre blob on a mapping overlay and move it around both to specific sites and, you know, and places you are never going to go, and just see. And my guess is you'll come up with max 4 or 5 that probably most, if not all of them, you're going to be able to throw out for other reasons, but we should do it.
And you could do 5, 10, and 20-acre blobs because that would get you up to the 5 megawatts.
Ernie.
I was just wondering, can you also, it occurs to me, because I live near some of these places, Route 5 has, for instance, three-phase on it, coming down to a good part of this town. And there are also some parcels, large parcels, that have been up and people have tried different kinds of commercial and developments over the 35 years that I've been here now. They've not really gone anywhere, but they're fairly large acreages and stuff like that. Now, what I'm thinking here is there a way to sort of simplify, you know, how you look, you know, because it's on Route 5, so it's kind of a business road, you know what I'm trying to say? And there are, you know, if you know the history, you know, there's land that if somebody wanted to put a 5 megawatt plant on it or installation, they would. You know, it's just a matter of getting somebody to do it, and so on. And do we want to do that too is another thing, but you know, the land also tends to be up the other side of it. It tends to be up against Route 91, which I personally think we should be splattering solar panels all up and down any interstate and sort of large highway.
Yeah, I would agree, or I would certainly not go with it's so scenic going up 91 that you can't put solar panels where you can see them from 91. That actually, when they did the Upper Loveland Viewshed, they were several of the angles that they were looking at it from was not I-91.
I'm trying to wrap my head around. I'm trying to wrap my head around why large swaths of asphalt are considered scenic.
I think it's because it talks about views from public roads that they should not be viewed from public roads, and so that's clearly a public road. Now, whether you want to say that doesn't matter, if you can see it from public road, that's a different thing. But currently, that is my understanding.
I would just go with the assumption that interstates are ugly, and so by definition they can't be scenic.
So make them uglier rather than planting wildflowers.
Well, I'm not 100% convinced that solar panels are ugly.
Well,
if you've got a highway, it's an industrial thing. It could look a lot better with solar panels on it than it does with, I don't know, whatever.
Mown grass.
One of the things, though, that was an initial goal of this group was that we were not going to do an overhaul of the town plan. We were going to try to go in and surgically insert comments. And so, I think right now and maybe that's not possible. Maybe what we're talking about now is a bigger rewrite, but I think that's a different conversation just in terms of how do you do that, get that done? Because when we started it, it was really to, again, first step is to get some clarity so the group can have some guidelines as they review proposals for solar. Because they're, Rod Francis didn't have any guidelines except for what he made up. And so things got approved that many were not pleased with. And so how do you create appropriate guidelines for the town? And so that was the original decision. And then Jan, then you've added this secondary goal, which is to move towards enhanced energy, which is fine. But again, is this a multi-phased process whereby the first goal is to get ourselves aligned so that next time someone shows up with a plan, we have new guidance from the 5100, but we also have guidelines within our plan, our own town plan, that help us make the determinations.
I mean, I still think surgical is possible. I think that if you look at the document, the summary that I sent out that you edited, it's not that long, and it does capture at least the proposed changes, and people may or may not agree with all of them, but
Right.
And then I think 5100 is less important, but it
Right.
sure sounds like substantial deference is important. And so that's enhanced energy plan justification. And I mean, even Kyle and Two Rivers' analysis of what we needed to do to get it an EEP was pretty minor changes. And so I think we're still at the point where, with some clarity of language, we could get surgical changes that enabled an EEP. And actually the biggest piece of work is redoing the scenic inventory.
Okay. Ernie.
Yeah, I think that when we're doing the surgical stuff, we can still think in the larger
Yeah,
scope
of course.
too.
Yeah.
And we'll just keep it, it's, I mean, when I've designed stuff or when I plan, legal attacks, I know what's right immediate and I know what's going to be long term, and I separate the two and I keep them listed, and I often will be able to return back.
Right.
So I don't see any kind of even conflict with the surgical approach.
Okay. Yeah, no,
I say
I mean, there's so much in the Waitsfield plan that was so appealing, right?
Yeah,
But
that's a very
getting us to that is a big overhaul. And so how do you find the right things to add, which is, I think, the challenge.
But if you review enough of these plans, you find that they are very similar.
Of course, yeah.
I've looked at a lot of them, and they all have the typical known constraints and then possible constraints, and then the town puts in their own constraints. And the challenge for Rutland in that Rutland Renewable Energy case, which is not clear in the decisions, are that particular field had been intended to be changed from industrial commercial. And it just, I don't know, the old guy never did it. It was one of those things. Well, it turns out that field, which had not been in agriculture for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, when a farmer was hired to turn over the soil, was some of the finest prime ag soil in Rutland County. And the farmers in Rutland County had been looking for a community garden type place for years. In fact, I had made a presentation to them at one point about one area. And this particular field was within 2 miles of the hospital, and the farmers had just gotten a contract to sell food to the hospital. So the neighbors, some of whom had some money, had offered some alternative sites and even offered the developer another money to actually start over with their experts. And it was Grow Solar and ultimately Green Mountain Power bought the project, and they were just dug in and they wouldn't give up on it. So it was kind of sad. In fact, the
Hmm.
original hearing officer, Mark Sinclair, had worked at Conservation Law Foundation, and his whole approach there, they spent a lot of time trying to protect prime ag soils from development. And in the middle of the case, he left. And so they got a new hearing officer, and I don't know why Mark left, but the prime ag soil piece was a very important piece. And
Yeah.
so that's the other part of this that you might want to think about is as you are looking at the specific areas near the three-phase power, take a look at the farming capacity, because you do not, again, you need to be specific. You can't just say no prime ag soils. You have to make it specific to the site, but take a look at, and there's good mapping of prime ag soils, although I found it's not perfect. But be aware of anything that has the potential for agriculture, and that you do not, you want to place some realistic standards in place for any of that.
Mhm.
I mean, you've got some basic topics: historic, prime
Yeah.
ag soils, forests, views, scenery, and then the water, slopes and those things.
So I wonder whether what we should do is to make this plan to get out and map the scenic roads. And I'm game to work on that on Sunday if anybody wants to think about doing that this coming
Well,
Sunday.
we had some conversation around it, and it's you depending how you do it individually versus as a group. But as soon as you put two of us in a car and drive around, it's a warned meeting.
Oh, better not do that.
So the distributed method is going to be better. And
Okay.
maybe we break the town up and say,
Yeah.
okay, do this quadrant, this quadrant, this quadrant, and then individually come together and say, here's what I noticed and here's my list. That's
Right.
going to be easier. And then, I mean, clearly you've got to get the town involved. We talked before about, let's define the task and then put something on the listserv that says we're doing this and we'd love this kind of input and here's the definitions we're talking, beat the drums a little bit.
So before you, but so I mean, there are two things. One, you can say, okay, well, we're going to do this, and what are going to be the definitions of what makes something scenic, right? What does that mean? And Annette, are there any, can you point us to any good guidelines that people have about that? I mean, do you know it when you see it, kind of thing?
Beauty
Or
is
is
in the
it
eye of the beholder.
beauty's in the eye of
You
the
can, I
beholder kind of
mean,
thing? Or like,
just to give us a starting point, if we say it as, hey, town, we want to update our scenic inventory. We have one. It is referenced in the zoning regs now, and it has some of those. It has a scoring criteria
okay,
as
okay.
part of it. How many
There,
people
there
see
is a book that I keep seeing reference to in some pre-filed testimony. Let's see, I think, okay, so Vermont Scenic Landscapes, A Guide for Growth and Protection, and it's by Elizabeth Courtney. Let me see if I can find it. I've run across it a couple of times recently as a reference.
Okay.
Jan,
Yeah,
where do you find that criteria? How do you get hold of that
The-
list of criteria?
the scenic inventory. I'm just pulling it up. It's Norwich Scenic. We did a It's the 2020 that's referenced in the plan. It's a, it's an old document that looks like somebody typed it on a,
Yeah, I was
typewriter.
involved in it in like 1990.
Yeah,
Or
so they redid it again, I think, maybe 10 years later or something. So it's there as a, I can find it. I have the PDF of it. But as essentially the appendix of the scenic inventory is the results using this scoring criteria of these different sites. And, so then the road past Van Orman's farm gets a 17 and the road here gets a 12 and, but anyway, it's a good starting point because then we can, then the exercise is let's redo a scenic
and
inventory,
it's already been accepted so far by the town
and
too.
it's already built into our regs. Right? It is
Right.
referenced in, and maybe the town plan too is, I mean, it's quite possible.
But that'd be useful to have in our cars. So when we go cruising around the town, even if it's
Yeah, there it is. Inventory scenic resources. I have it. Inventory of scenic resources, and it's the one that's referenced, and it's January 2000.
Can you just copy the link in an email?
Yeah,
John?
I have it in, I'll send it to everybody here. And then I'll send it to Pam just to be sure she puts it into
Yeah, great.
on the website. But it has, photos of this road and that road, cemeteries, rivers, the role of the scenic resources inventory in public domains, and then appendices, the matrix for evaluating scenic resources along roads and highways, frequency the view is seen by the public, natural and visual contrast, order and harmony, focal points, uniqueness, observation point, foreground and distance views sensitive to development. And then they rank according to each of those what look like about 30 different views.
Okay.
Hudson Road, Open Fields by Von Moltke, Warner Meadow, Bloody Brook, and they each have a score relative to those. So
There's a term that I've encountered in aesthetics evaluations, and it's open space. So that's another thing I sent you and Mary
Yeah.
on a couple of things, and one of them is the town of Essex, and it has a similar list to what you're talking about: focal points, sense of depth, traditional landscape patterns, extent of view. You might want to add open space to those listings.
Okay.
One question I've had is we've been talking about scenic resources. But other resources, important resources and are also at stake in all of this, which is, for instance, agricultural resources. I mean, Annette was talking about what happened in Rutland, and I'm thinking, that'd be pretty stupid for it to happen in Norwich, and it's pretty stupid to happen elsewhere, as a matter of fact. Because I mean, you need to eat as well as you need to have solar, as well as you need to have power. So, I mean, it seems to me there should be other inventories that we're putting together as well as just scenic. I mean, scenic is for the tourists as much as anything else. They're not really paying for the state, and they're not helping us very much. On the other hand, the farmers are what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And the forestry stuff too. I mean, we want to keep the trees. We need the trees. That's how you control CO2, for instance.
Well, Ernie, you were talking about driving along Route 5. That would be a really good area to look at for the farming aspects of it too.
Yeah.
If that's
Well,
what today's power is.
That's the contradiction I'm seeing. Well, here the contradiction. I mean, farming and scenic often go hand in hand, whereas. But the thing is I just think it's kind of odd that we're talking just scenic so far. And I don't know if that's just sort of a buzzword for a lot of things, since farming, farms are often scenic too. but I think we should be careful of that because, relying on that sort of thing. Because I think, because scenic is what, is in the eye of the beholder, farming is not. And farming is an essential thing, as is the woodlands, and open land is essential, really. And so on. Each in their own right, not just as part
Right.
of being scenic.
Do you?
So if we're gonna put, if you're gonna put something beyond ag, is there anything else you'd add to that? I mean, we've got the value of the historic village, right? That's always been there. The shoreline has been there. The ridge lines have been there. If you do ag, if you do scenic resources, are there other resources you would have? Because really what we're saying, we're protecting water resources, we're protecting farm resources, we're protecting steep slopes.
Steep
But,
slopes are also a resilience issue as well.
believe me, I agree. I agree.
I mean,
Um,
a lot of these things cover several different,
Multiple things, right? Right.
Not
I mean,
just-
look at the
Hmm.
flooding the state has had. If we start cutting every steep slope, we're going to be
Right.
a terrible
Mhm.
mess. Okay. All right. So, but just thinking about, we've got the cart and the horse. Do we want to take the maps and divide them up and go look and do this and come up with a, kind of a stalking horse for people to respond to? Or do we ask everyone for their opinions and then try to do things? Because that's the other, because my sense is I'm always much happier to respond to somebody's proposal than to have everyone starting at scratch.
Yeah.
Well, you do
Well, I think
have
we
this
should
existing
start
scenic
with what
route.
we got.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
something.
Right.
And
if we-
so then
yeah.
if we say to the town, in however we publicize it, it could be our minutes or it could be listserv posts or whatever, and we
Mhm.
say, this is the exercise. It is to
Right.
redo this.
Mhm.
And so then because if you ask the question, what has gotten more or less scenic in the last 20 years? That's an easier question than what's scenic in Norwich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed that much.
Much. Right. Right.
well, it depends on what you count as scenic also. I mean, someone like me considers almost every development a blight. I mean, every McMansion that goes up in this town's a blight from my point of view, but other people are going to seriously disagree with me.
Well,
Usually-
I think we would have to, again, start with what we've got. So say, okay, here's the 2000 inventory, here's the definitions, here's the criteria. And is any of it, dated or just different? We don't agree with it anymore. Do we want to open the can of worms that is redoing the definitions and the criteria? Or do we want to just sort of check for changes?
I think checking for the changes, because redoing the criteria is a whole nother can of worms. And if we want to get this off the ground, doing this stuff, I mean, we can always each make our own little notes of such and such, the inventory's defined this way, we've defined something this way and stuff like that. And then we say, well, I noticed it was kind of like, we can make these, and then sort of we can come together and then sort of a little bit by consensus or something, sort of mesh it so that it starts to fit either within the criteria that we've got, or we start having new criteria to add to the criteria that we have. We can do that too. But so that it allows us to get started. And I mean, this is not something that's really the most odious task that anyone on the planning commission has to undertake. I mean, riding
Mhm.
around looking at nice places, or places
And
that
I would remind us all that starting in a week, we have staff.
Great. How delightful. Especially for you, Jan. All right. Well, look I think the idea is to say we're going to review it, not that we're going to redo it. And why don't we pull it out and say if anyone has comments or contributions, please share them. And because I do think that and the other question is, Jan, does this come out of the solar siting committee or does this come out of the planning commission? Because I do think that it might be
yeah.
better to come out of the planning commission is asking for
think- I
this
mean, we
as
could
guidance
ask.
for the town plan, rather than for the solar where people are be like, okay, what's the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a valid perspective, is that it's fine for the suggestion or the priority ask to come from this working group
Yeah.
that says, hey, we got a 24-year-old scenic inventory that we're going to reference when we make these surgical changes to the town plan. It sure looks like that needs a relook. And it should be done not just for solar, it should be done because it's a useful tool, and get the PC to
okay,
to basically
weigh in on it.
sponsor that activity.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm afraid I've got to sign off now. So Jan, why don't I follow up with you on that in an email, and then I think I've also got to look at dates. Or the November 5th, I think might have been our next date, and that is election day. We're running into that again. And
Yeah, and that's before we have
the-
PCs
right, the
the 12th, but I have several no-shows for the 12th PC.
yeah, I can't do the 12th. Yeah. So
So I think both dates may need to float. So we may need to do some calendar fun
okay.
to get either one.
Okay.
I'd be more flexible than others, so
You
I may
can't
just
play-
put it
Okay.
weird.
You also have to be careful because, people might be exiting the United States after.
That's true. We may have.
On that
Wait a
note,
minute.
I'm going to exit, but I think you're right. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Annette. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.